Hello, and welcome to my floor. I apologize for the informalness of this video, but I just wanted to go really quickly over what's gone on with my my Slot-1 setup, and I guess socket 370, because I've got a socket here. The last time we talked Slot-1, these are the processors that I owned. The two Celerons, of course, Mendocino and Covington, as well as my Katmai Pentium 3 500, and my Klamath Pentium 2 266. I also briefly on-screen showed this socket with a Celeron 667 in it. Since then, I've been collecting processors. It's kind of become a problem, but I've added to my collection a small amount, just a few additional machines. Nothing major, just a couple. Really nothing surprising or atypical at all. It's a pretty normal collection. Okay, I have a problem. I'm sorry. Anyway, I have all of these Slot-1 CPUs now, and I need to test them. And to do so, I have got a couple more motherboards. Now, originally, I was doing my Slot-1 testing on this board. We'll stay. This is I think it's a PC chips. I will put the model number of this board up on the screen now. But this uses the VIA Apollo Pro chipset. Not the Apollo Pro 133 or 133A. It uses the bad Apollo Pro chipset. It's incredibly compatible. It'll work with any Celeron Pentium 2 or Pentium 3 that uses a 66 or 100 megahertz bus. And it'll work with any CPUs with multipliers up to X8, which is relevant because of the next board I want to show you. But we know the problem with this board. I've known it for a while since I had it, and it was giving me weird results on my testing. And also, I think a couple of commenters have also noticed that this board is slow. There's a definite performance problem with this board, and especially with the Pentium 3s, it's just not giving me the performance I want to see out of that CPU. And that seems to hold true across the spectrum. I've tested most of these CPUs with this board, and the results are pretty disappointing. To that end, I picked up a couple more motherboards. And the first one that I picked up was really promising. I was really hopeful it would be a good addition to the fleet. However, so I can get it to a spot where it'll stay put. There we go. However, as promising as this board looked, it turned out this is not the board I want for my testing. First of all, this is a BioStar M6 TBA, and this board, in its later revisions, is a pretty fair overclocker, actually. It uses the 440BX chipset, which is one of the fastest chipsets available for Slot-1. But this happens to be an early revision of the board. This is a Rev 1.1. You can see here version 1.1, which means that this has a multiplier that tops out at 5.5x. And that's not expandable through the BIOS because you have to set your bus speed and multiplier combination using these little jumpers on the corner here. Not so great. Maximum speed of a Pentium 2 or Pentium 3 550. So that's not awesome. Again, it is also limited to 66 megahertz and 100 megahertz frontside bus speeds. The last motherboard that I picked up recently is better, but still a little disappointing. Let me grab it. Hang on. Okay, so this is the other board that I picked up. This is also a 440BX, but you might notice, at least I noticed right away, that it is bright green, and that's usually a bad sign because that means it was manufactured by Intel for an OEM, generally speaking. And I'm not sure who manufactured this board, but it sure seems like it's Intel. We've got like distance measurement marks along the edge. Got some missing solder pads. It's definitely not a high-end board, and when I boot it up, the BIOS tells me that it is. the BIOS boot logo tells me it is from a Gateway. Interestingly, this seems to be the same board, at least the same board family that LGR used in the Gateway, the 1999 Gateway Essential restoration. If you look at some of the areas in the video, if you pause it and look at the board, let's get the same cluster of capacitors here up by the slot. There's the same missing pads by the PCI slots. This like inventory control number, I think, is different. There's a different carrier for the battery. Like, this is a different revision of the board, but it's the same board and the same layout as in that Essentials PC. The nice part about this, you know, it's disappointing because it's a Gateway board, so of course there are no overclocking options whatsoever on it. However, it is still a 440BX, and it is still pretty fast. You know, obviously we're limited to AGP2X on it, but as far as like raw performance, I did do some testing with my 266 and 500 and my Voodoo 3 to see how much faster this board is versus the old Apollo Pro, and the numbers are pretty interesting. So anyway, the objective today is to take this board and take all of these CPUs and do some testing and see which ones work, which ones don't work. I'm going to guess this one probably doesn't work. This is the Celeron 667. This uses a 10x multiplier. It really only worked with later revision boards. Most of these early boards had an 8x multiplier limit. So my guess is that won't work. Obviously I won't be able to test my Covington because I don't have the cooler for it at the moment. I actually have a replacement cooler for it. I've got this StarTech cooler here in box ready to go, but I don't my shipment from Amazon that's supposed to have my thermal adhesive so that I can bond this to the heatsink, or bond the heatsink to the CPU, hasn't arrived yet. It's like 2 weeks overdue. I don't know if it's going to get here. It's very frustrating. Anyway, I don't think that will work. That's a total wild card. This is a VIA C3. You thought you could watch a Tech Ambrosia video and not see a Cyrix, huh? Well, rest assured it's not actually a Cyrix. This is the VIA C3. This is based on the Centaur CPU design team. So it's actually more closely related to chips like the old Win chip. And obviously VIA used this architecture for a long time, all the way out through like 2009, I think, is when they switched to, it was still the same design team, but they switched to a superscalar out-of-order core. So yeah, they used this CPU design for a long time, the C5 and the C7. Obviously this is the C3, and that's their line of low-power embedded CPUs. So that'll be a wild card. I don't know if that's going to work on this board. Support for it was pretty eh. But let's go through what we've got here. I've got let's start with these two Celerons here. Two Celeron 533s. This is the Mendocino 533, and this is the Coppermine 128 533A. Those are going to go on the Slocket carrier board. I'm guessing they're going to work. They are 533, I think, is 66 times 8 multiplier, so that should work. The voltage difference might be the problem with this one, because this one uses 1.5 volts. I don't know if this Gateway board can go down to 1.5 volts, but I've got an original stock Intel Socket 370 cooler for that, so that should be fun. Let's see, this is my original Cat My 500. This is my Clemath 266. I also picked up a Clemath 300 to test, so this will be interesting to test. This has just got a massive heatsink on it, and some clips that I realized I could adjust to fit this fan, which mounts into an 80mm fan hole, so it's got a heatsink and a fan on it. Anyway, I've got those two Clemath CPUs to test. This one is 80523, so this is Deschutes. This is a 300 MHz Deschutes, so we'll test that. I believe this is a 450 MHz Deschutes. 80523, 450, yep. It's a 450 MHz Deschutes. This is the fastest Pentium 2 produced. Along with that, I've got a 450 MHz Katmai Pentium 3. This is interesting because this appears in the retail packaging. This is what you would get if you went and bought a Pentium 3 on the shelf. So you get this stock Intel cooler. So most of my CPUs are these, they don't have these or they've got these cheap aluminum heatsinks on them with no fans. And these were for OEMs. So like if you went and bought your Dell or your Gateway, you'd get something like this. This is if you got an actual retail package CPU. So this is really cool. I like this. So that's Pentium 3 450. Of course, I've got my Mendocino 300A, the C3. This is a Coppermine, a full Coppermine Pentium 3 750. This uses a 100 MHz bus, so my hope is it will work on the Gateway board. Fingers crossed. Obviously, this is Covington, and won't be testing that today. This one, I don't know if it'll work. It probably won't. But this is a Pentium 3 Coppermine 600EB. So this is the 600 MHz 4.5x multiplier on a 133 frontside bus. It probably won't work, but we'll see. Anyway, that is the plan for today. All set? Bottoms up. Well, here are the results of the testing, and yeah, most of the CPUs worked. I was very surprised. You can see over on the right side of this chart here. I was very surprised at the results with the two Clemath CPUs, my Clemath 266 and my Clemath 300. They did boot and they did post. I didn't bother to test Quake 2 or Quake 3 on them because they booted and posted at 133 megahertz, which was extremely strange. That might be just a BIOS incompatibility, or it might be that, you know, Gateway never assumed that they'd be using Clemath. Pentium 2s in these machines, so they never bothered to, put those CPU identifiers in the BIOS. I'm not sure. It's kind of an interesting result, though, and since, the board has absolutely no overclocking abilities or speed tweaking of any kind, they're stuck at 133, so they're not actually usable on this board. And of course the Celeron, the Pentium 3 Coppermine 600EB did not work, and actually that one gave me a beep code, which was kind of cool. Interesting. It beeps. So the BIOS on the board definitely recognized, or at least recognized that it was asking for a 133 frontside bus and it couldn't deliver it, and it was able to beep the BIOS. So yeah, that is pretty much everything. I don't have the Celeron 667 in here. I use that basically as a litmus test, like, okay, what does this board do when it gets a CPU it can't use? But in that case, actually, the Celeron 667 didn't do anything. You turn the board on and it just hung. No post, no boot. I just had to hold down the power button to get it to turn off. So anyway, you can see the results here for the rest of the CPUs. Pretty good results, honestly. Like for the Celeron 533s, they're turning in results somewhere between the Katmai 500 and the Katmai 450 and the Katmai 500, which is pretty good. That's not bad, especially considering how inexpensive those were back in the day. But yeah, and then you can definitely see that the VIA C3 is not even really in the same league as the rest of these processors, running at 550 megahertz and turning in scores that are lower than the Celeron 300A. So yeah, anyway, this was a fun little jaunt, and I don't have footage of it, but I actually ended up breaking one of the pins off of my Celeron 533A, so I've got to order another one of those, because that is destined for another video coming up soon, where I compare multiple CPUs across clock speeds, various clock speeds, so that should be an interesting video. Anyway, if you've watched this far, thanks for watching, and yeah, this is just a real quick one this week. Just some B-roll and some Slot-1 testing. I'm really sad that this board is not overclockable, because we could have some real fun with the Celerons, pushing them up to 450 or something. But that'll have to wait for a future video. I've got a, hopefully, fingers crossed, decent overclocking board on the way, so we'll see if that ends up happening. Anyway, thanks for watching, and have a great night!